As many of you know, Upper Klamath Lake is a large and very shallow area. This, in fact, is an older slide, I know, since the property that the Nature Conservancy reverted back to Upper Klamath Lake over the last few years. It is now 125 square miles of open water area and still only averages about 8 feet deep when the lake is full. Project operations, we attempt to store water in the off-season, October through March, so it is available for the April through September period for irrigation. That is the project's purpose. And I think that's the obvious on the last one you can read. The flow of the water through there. And I'll talk a little more. My last slide is up the map of the project. We'll be able to look at it a little more. Wanted to throw this one in. A number of people have heard about it but aren't familiar with the actual natural rock reef that occurred prior to Link River Dam being constructed in 1921 or completed in 1921. This was the actual reef that controlled it. Pelican Marina now sits kind of where you see those little houses and industry. And something that the wonders of GIS and the ability to do different things, we finally figured out where they made the cut, when they put the dam in, where they made the cut to be able to utilize more of the water. And it was actually a part of what is known as Putnam's Point now. That little crib you see running through there was at the very edge of Putnam's Point, and through GIS we were able to, in old photos, find out where that was cut and what was done. So it kind of nipped off the end of Putnam's Point and built it up a little more, and that became what is known as the notch. So it widened the area for water to flow through. Okay, the map of the Klamath Project. This is what I was referring to as the east side, which depends on Clear Lake and Gerber reservoirs here along the Lost River section, and they're dependent on that. There's about 26,000 acres in Langell and Horse Valley and Horsefly irrigation districts. Clear Lake, actually, prior to the dam being constructed, it still has essentially two lobes, a west lobe and an east lobe. The east lobe used to be farmed each summer when it would dry out. There was a little channel that would flow through to here, and all this area would dry out and they would farm it. And the Lost River would often appear later on because some of these would dry up and you would begin to see water building, and there would be more and more that would come down through here. The Lost River Diversion Channel was built in 1912 to divert water from the Lost River that still escaped here and was used to flood Tule Lake. It was designed to shuttle water over to the Klamath River, essentially to remove water from that area. Then later on, as more irrigation was developed, it began to operate in both directions to where it does today. It shuttles water in the wintertime from the Lost River system that would flood Tule Lake in those areas, shuttles it to the Klamath River, and then in the summertime is able to shuttle some of the stored water through the Klamath River back over to the Lost River through Station 48 in this area and control that portion of it. There are a few major canals or diversion points within the project. One is the A Canal, you're all very familiar with, as it runs through town. Then off of the diversion channel there are a pump station there called Miller Hill Pumping, and then Station 48, which takes water here and drops it back in and over to the Lost River system where it flows in through the canal system there. Water from A Canal comes down and splits into the B and C and irrigates up this area up to where Harthold Dam is. So throughout the summer period, all the water from here on down, or the vast majority other than about 15 CFS, is all return flow from water diverted through the A, B, and B canals and through this area, down to the Tule Lake area. Then there is the North Canal and 80 Canal, which are part of the Klamath Drainage District area. And this 80 Canal also supplies water to Lower Klamath Lake National Wildlife Refuge down in here. The Straits Drain picks up water from the refuge through here and comes back through this area. and then is pumped back into the Klamath River through the straight stream right back into there. Keno Dam was actually, there's been two versions of Keno Dam. Was called the Needle Dam, which was constructed in the 1930s on top of the Keno Reef. The purpose of that, according to J.C. Boyle, was to help them actually control the water upstream of J.C. Boyle so they could better utilize its power production, and instead of just depending on whatever water was flowing down the river. During the 1964-65 flood, it backed up water, that Needle Dam backed up water even up into Klamath Falls area, so they knew something had to be done. So in the late 1960s, the current Keno Dam was constructed, and the reef was notched, or they basically blew a hole in the old natural reef that acted like the dam and created part of Lower Klamath Lake, and created a Keno Dam where it is today, about a quarter or half mile down from the old reef. And its function is to allow or pass that flood waters down that the old Keno Reef did not. It was a pretty restrictive point. Very much like the natural reef in Upper Klamath Lake operated prior to the dam going in.
What is the vertical difference between the old, like where you're saying the Link River Dam, and the old natural reef?
The natural reef was right around 4138 was the elevation. And as you could see from that old picture, it was very narrow spots, so you had to reach a certain amount of head or elevation above that reef to create flow past it in doing that. The current operational elevation now that I should say the notch bottom, I believe, is at 4131, but operationally we can't go below maybe 4137, 4138, somewhere in that point. So what it did was allow you to store a little more water in Upper Klamath Lake by giving you the elevation that the dam created as a maximum of 4143, and a little lower elevation than the reef would allow you to take naturally in doing that. One other thing that may be a misnomer by a number of folks too is you can see where the reclamation project began. Reclamation did not construct dikes around Upper Klamath Lake or can do any of the work up above where you see Link River Dam. And a lot of people think that reclamation created that whole area, and that's just not correct.
Our next speaker is sick, Taylor Watson. And, she's at home in Fort Klamath tonight, and Becky Hyde is going to take her place and talk about how water moves in the Upper Basin and the mostly Williams and the Sprague River systems up above the lake, and how that all works from Chillicothe clear on.
So every panel needs a weak link. And here we go. Danette is desperately sick. She has a very high temperature and pneumonia and can barely speak, or else we would have drugged her here and made her do this. So she emailed me her PowerPoint, and I will be doing the cardinal sin of PowerPoint, which is just reading off of her slides. Okay, so I guess the one thing that I wanted to say just before I start is that I think there's a lot of confusion in the basin between what is called project irrigators and off-project irrigators. And the project irrigators are the folks that irrigate in that area that John Hicks just talked about. And the off-project irrigators irrigate mostly up above Upper Klamath Lake. And are not on the, and we're called the off project, which is sort of demeaning in a way. Like, couldn't we come up with something better than off project? But so, where does the Upper Basin get its water? It gets it from snowpack, melt, and can either infiltrate and recharge groundwater or run off to tributaries into the main stem, or it just evaporates into thin air. Okay. So. Where did all the water go? And you just need to look to the hills and mountains in the Upper Basin. And for example, juniper has altered the landscape greatly in the Upper Basin. It's reduced infiltration, water's ability to go into the ground. It's altered the water budget, how much water there is available, and it's changed the rangeland because juniper continues to increase by about 3% a year. And junipers have really, it's kind of fun. Dr. Clark probably has photos of this just to kind of show you, you know, the differences in how many juniper there are today compared to how many there were about 100 years ago. It's pretty amazing. So this is the this is a map that kind of shows some of the rivers, like the Sycan River, the Sycan Marsh, the North Fork Sprague, South Fork. Only 26.8% of the streams in this basin are perennial, and you can kind of see what those are around the communities of in the Sprague. So there are 720,640 acres in this subbasin, and the major landowners are the U.S. Forest Service with 54%, private timber companies with 20.4%, state managed land is about 3%, Bureau of Land Management 0.6%, and then private land is about 22%, or 158,540 acres. And the growing season of 50 to 70 days, agriculture is limited to primarily grazing and hay. There are approximately 81,650 irrigated acres, of which 53,000 use surface water. So in the off project, we have folks using surface water, which is irrigating directly out of the rivers, and then we have other folks that use groundwater. So you probably already know that, but in case you don't. Okay. Then we're going to go on down the Sprague and Sycan. The Sprague River below the confluence of the North and South Forks. This is a flat valley lowland, mostly grazing and hay fields. There's around 35 to 40,000 cattle that graze this subbasin, and about 8,000 tons of hay are produced in this area. So Danette wanted to point out what happened here in the 1950s is that the Corps of Engineers straightened and levied in the Bly area, and basically the river doesn't meander around like it used to. It's kind of channelized and straightened, and that was the best thinking at the time, and it has created some pretty big problems for us nowadays. So what happens when you straighten rivers is that rivers can no longer access their floodplains, the areas outside of the actual river channel. And floodwater is no longer stored in the riparian zones. When we saw that slide earlier about the importance to the lower river flows in late summer, it's also important that we are able to store water up in these big river valleys for later release downriver. So it's kind of like a great big valley sponge when it's working right, and that's good for agriculture too. The river's energy is not reduced, so the river has a greater erosive capacity. So it can kind of cut down in a channel and run off real quick. And we have Troy Fletcher here tonight, who's from the Yurok tribes down below. And we want to keep a hold of that water a little bit longer before we send it down to Detroit. Okay, so Sprague River and the Beatty Gap. Within this reach are numerous seeps and springs which contribute about 41 CFS to the Sprague River. And a stream gauge downstream near Beatty monitors flows, and the average flows vary between 200 CFS to about 600 CFS, with our maximum flows usually in April to May. Okay?